Green Fruit, Chapter 4. They were in the fight, and in it fast. He was either driven to exhaustion or drove himself there between checking the Normandy for Cerberus shenanigans and keeping in touch with his disparate crew. They seemed on par with his first crew in terms of, we just landed here and we're maybe vaguely going the same way, except that there were mercenary elements that made his instincts over-report danger, often coming from behind him. Hard to describe. Without trust and teamwork, his sense of danger had a bad sunburn. And everything set it off. Everything hurt. He wondered if he'd get back to himself, or if this was permanent, a bizarre side effect of death. Seems like an awful curse, as though the ferryman had told him as he passed back over Styx and Acheron. You're going to live, but you'll be paranoid. Possibly slightly itchy, maybe some dry mouth. Hades was petty. He felt more often that he should be watching his back, with the people at his back, who should be watching his back, but he didn't know if it was to stab him there or not. Now he'd found Garrus, and Garrus was a mess. Barely alive. Garrus wouldn't be alive at all if Moya hadn't gone after Archangel. He let Karin work on Garrus, didn't draw attention to himself. When he realized he was covered in drying blue blood, he went to go get a shower. He leaned his head on the tile, remembering the moment of asking someone to stay with Garrus while he went and closed the shutters. He left Miranda with Garrus, took Saeed, but he didn't trust either of them. Not with Garrus's life. Turns out he couldn't be trusted with Garrus's life either. He told himself it could have been worse, would have been worse, gritted his teeth and turned the spray to freezing, standing under it until he started to shiver. He cleared his mind and focused. On his way back to the medbay, he got 2 cups of coffee from the galley and realized he had no idea if Karin drank coffee at all, or how she took it if she did. He had an odd moment of business versus pleasure and lover versus colleague. He did not want to impose on her medbay without bringing a gift, and he did not know what that gift should be. He hadn't had any spare time to see her, other than through the glass. He had established command, and she had established her medbay, and he tried to avoid drawing attention to her, though he was sure he couldn't help it. His mouth twisted in frustration, and then he smoothed out his expression through sheer will, dumped both cups because she'd be in surgery for who knew how long. He was not a guest or a lover. He was someone potentially screwing up sterile precautions. He chose to re-enter the medbay quietly, sat as far away as possible, and did not stare at her, at the trays that became covered with blue spatter, holding inexplicable gadgets, some of them ending up a permanent part of the Turian whose heartbeat seemed too slow to sustain life. He didn't ask questions. He kept his mind as clear as he could. Exhaustion, fear, trauma, and responsibility would wear him down if he let them. Garrus had not left a forwarding address, had not wanted to be found, and Moya had only recently been upgraded from dead. People lose touch when they're dead. The surgery took 12 hours. Karin was as cool and elegant in her motions, in her voice, with her assistants, as calm and sure at the end as she had been at the beginning, spinning miracles from tech, the inner workings of her mind, and the steady grace of her hands. She did not take a break. He had to leave a few times to handle alerts on ship business, but returned quietly to keep vigil. When Garrus was cleaned up, bandaged, all spatter removed from bed, floor, and people, Mangaris looked as though he were only sleeping comfortably and not under heavy Taurian sedation. Karin came toward Moya and told him, "Commander, Garrus is going to be fine. He's going to have extensive scarring on his face. I would offer to remove them, but retaining scars as symbols of valor is a tradition among Taurians, and it would be rude for me to make that choice myself." Yeah, wouldn't want him getting angry at you for putting him back together. His temper seems to have gotten a bit worse. Not that I blame him. He has not had the best week. Karin, do you drink coffee? No. All right then. Do you drink tea? No. Despite my accent and origins, I never developed the habit, stationed on too many far-flung bases. It seemed an expensive habit to develop. You eat, though. I almost saw it once. Can I get you anything? Thank you. No. Can I get you anything? Tell me what to do. I'll stay here. You go get some sleep. Commander, that is not necessary. The staff are perfectly capable of alerting me. His smile was rueful, part teasing and part pain. Karin, would it kill you to need something every now and again? Perhaps not me, but it might kill others. Right. Not as rhetorical as I might have hoped. When is he going to be conscious? I would like to allow 12 hours for integration of the cybernetics before waking him. And you're going to sleep? I am. May I walk you to your cabin? If you would, yes. Please. He held out his arm and she smiled, placed her hand through his bent elbow, and they walked. Her cabin wasn't far. He was shattered, exhausted, and trying not to show it since she was so capable, able to manage a 12-hour shift to save a life without losing any of her grace. He was so far out of place he feared he'd never find his way back to the life he had imagined once. He didn't trust his crew. The one crew member he did trust had been about to cross over the Taurian river of the underworld. A Taurian who could not swim. Karin had come on board with faith and trust Moya did not deserve, could not provide. Not here. He was indebted to Cerberus, and it appeared his cash wasn't good elsewhere. When they got to her door, he said, "Karin, thank you. Without you, he'd be dead." She didn't disagree. It had been dire, and the gurgling spatter of blue blood was fresh enough for both of them to be unable to put it behind them as something trivial. She passed her cool palm over his cheek, and he closed his eyes. He was ready to tear himself away and head to his cabin, exhausted. But she took his hand with her other hand and led him inside. She indicated a seat at a small table, and he sat, a little unsteadily. She had a private cabin that was perhaps half the size of his, without the office but with her own bathroom. Very nice. Cerberus was eager to acquire my services. I'm grateful and terrified. That does seem to describe your mission. You asked me what I drank. She filled 2 tumblers with blue liquid. Cerise ice brandy. Caffeine may not always be available. Alcohol is. This is a sorry. He took a sip. Strong stuff. I bought this bottle the day Cerberus asked me to work for them, which I negotiated to working for you. The day I believed it was possible you might come back. He lifted his eyes to her, smiled, and took a sip. Stronger stuff. Cherie, I was so sorry to hear that your mother had passed. She was a lovely woman. I spoke to her after your death. He swallowed. His mother had died 9 months ago. Sky car accident. She'd never trusted them. One of her strange prohibitions, but she always found an excuse to use them rather than walk. If she were here, she'd be blaming her death on Mars being in retrograde and how that affected traffic patterns. His mother was now in retrograde. He missed her. Thank you. Time had passed him by. The rhythm of life shattered. He felt the existential crisis of not knowing whether or not he could trust himself, with so many people choosing not to. It seemed they all knew something he didn't. He lifted tortured eyes to her, wanting to say something about gratitude or about his mother, wanting to be worthy of trust he did not feel he deserved. He'd wanted to keep Karin safe, make her happy, and that seemed naive, impossible. All the force he felt in her presence, wanting to be near her, now he felt like he should run away as far as possible. He should not have allowed her on board. He should not have been so selfish. She smiled at him. I've seen that look. Not on your face before. What look? Self-doubt? Have you ever had this look on your face? Many times. Really? You, Karin? I don't believe it. He was trying to tease her, but it came out solemn, with the flavor of the doubt on his lips and his blood. When I bought this bottle, in fact. He carefully took a sip. What did you doubt then? You were dead. That seemed a solid thing, a true thing, something final and absolute. Coming back to life was doubtful. So we're both concerned that I'm not a true thing, or that I am a thing. You shouldn't have to deal with the uncertainty. She took her own careful sip and then knocked back the entire tumbler with a slight grimace. He'd be coughing if he tried that. He smiled in admiration. She stood up and dusted herself off slightly. No dust on her. Cherie, come here. He reached for his tumbler, knocked it back, coughed because he knew that was going to happen, but just had to check. She smiled at him. He stood up and walked to her. She was so... The waves of admiration, attraction, protection, a lodestone of good things in her. Good things she pulled from him that he wanted to give. She took his face between her hands. Death was an absolute. When I bought this bottle, I did not really believe, but I wanted it to be true. I missed you every day, Cherie, missed the opportunity to see you smile. Just having this bottle and possibly not having to drink it alone meant more to me than all the final absolutes. If you're not entirely you, if you feel doubt, then I can tell you the same thing you told me. Without you, Garrus would be dead. Don't let doubt rob you of a chance to find a new life. Would it kill you to need something every now and again? Her eyes were sparkling with laughter at that last statement. Lady, I have been chasing you for me, a long time, and the impulse to continue to do it survived death. I have no doubt about that. You have no idea how ironic it is, you asking me about need. Maybe I do. I'm afraid they're going to hurt you. And I'm afraid they're going to hurt you. Don't worry about me. Did you not understand the story about the hope in the blue bottle? I like the story about the hope in the silver and green woman more. I know you're tired, in doubt, worried, and afraid. I'd like to wait until you are rested and certain, but the last time I turned you away would have been the last time I would have seen you at all, if not for a crisis and a miracle. I'm the crisis, and you're the miracle? I have learned something. Crisis will follow you, and I should take my opportunity for hope when I can. He was going to say he wanted to give her more than crisis, and doubt felt again that he should have brought a gift to her, at least his best self, but he didn't have it. Her green eyes closed as she moved up on tiptoes to kiss him, her hands along the sides of his face and throat. He couldn't think. Melting sensation like rain, like a river, moving slowly and washing everything away that could be a word or a thought, leaving behind warm and clean. He didn't move, held still by a reverence for her that didn't let him take an action like try to touch her. He savored being touched, focusing on the feel of her hands on his face, her mouth on his, bending his head down to try to kiss her back. Floodgates and flushes, moments of watching her through the glass in the mid-bay, all that frustration and longing and love. He loved her. That he knew. Being loved back, invited inside. He felt the smile on her lips. She moved one of her hands to take one of his, place it around her waist. His breath moved faster, but he still could not move, focused on her mouth, the taste of her, and the rumble of loosed. Loosed what? He wanted her, and had found it impossible to be around her without staring and babbling, trying to find it in himself to be a man she might need or want. It seemed he didn't think it would ever come true, that he'd chase after her until civilization crumbled and life was exterminated, that he'd chase while the inevitable and the solid happened. So after chasing, to hold still was transcendent. He felt he wanted to stand still for as long as he'd chased after her, to hold still and need her. That was a lovely thought, but it seemed that once her soft moan vibrated across his lips, he'd had just about enough of standing still. That rumbling of loosed desire after a moment of suspension collapsed into kinetic need to match the more solemn themes. His other hand moved around her waist, pulled her up and in, his hand on her lower back, the slight ridge of her spine under his hand, precious because it was hers. Exhaustion. A shot of cerise ice brandy and a woman of silver and green hope in his arms, and suddenly he could do anything again. Anything. He could be anyone he wanted. He could do whatever he wanted. He could save a friend because he had her on board. He could save a galaxy because he had her to protect. Karin? I know this all started out as a doubt-pity thing, and I appreciate it. I do. Tell me to go. Right now. Because I've moved past being consoled. Really fast. I mean, really fast. Whiplash fast. You want to talk about your whip? I want to talk about my whip. I want you to talk about my whip. My God, do I love your voice. You taste like brandy and beautiful. Please tell me I get the girl. You get the woman. Right now. Tell me I get the woman right now. You get the woman right now. I know we've had an unusual courtship. I'm going to tell you right now and often that I love you. I love you too. Oh, please say, I love you, Sherry. I love you, Sherry. That's it. I'm saving the galaxy. I'm doing it for you. Just like I did with the Citadel. She laughed against his mouth, and it was the most delicious thing. It drew his attention back to her lips. Talk later. Kiss now. Finally. Not a no. He didn't doubt she meant it. He didn't doubt that at all, but he did think she would possibly come to her senses. And he didn't want that either. Her hands stayed on his face, pulling him down. His hands around her waist lifted her up, and he kissed her. She kissed him, laughter gone, and no more questions. He wanted to fumble and tear, but she, as always, was graceful and sedate. He slowed down to appreciate his hands on cloth and then skin, her hands removing all their clothing blind because he was too clumsy and occupied with her mouth and the texture of her skin. Then she was moving down, and he tried to follow her with his mouth until he couldn't, until he almost whined with her being away, until her hands were on his back, her mouth on his chest, and all he could do was to stand again, not chasing and getting the woman, finally, hands and silver hair that was thick and warm between his fingers, sliding strands. Her hands traced the muscles of his abdomen, trailing fingertips and her teeth on the ridges of his ribs, lips on his stomach. He wanted to pull her back up and throw her onto the bed, but she resisted the pull of his hands on her shoulders. Then her mouth was on his cock, and he could not think, could not move, closed his eyes, and promised to really save the galaxy. Save the shit out of it. Save it twice. Save it every fucking day. Oh, God. Her mouth still had a cool burn of strong alcohol, her hands doing things he could not describe except in moans and shudders, and his hands in her hair. He was still and reverent, felt like a God in a very non-ironic way, as though he'd been brought back to life because this was what he had missed, and that had been unbearably cruel to have come so close to her and failed to experience what it was like to have her mouth, her hands on his body with the warmth of her lips still against his. Volcanic need built until he did not care that she resisted. He picked her up and had her back on the bed without thinking about it, his mouth down her throat, her breasts, hands along skin that moved with his fingertips. She started to moan, and he wanted more of that. Definitely more of that. Time speeding up in action, dictated by more of her moans, and making her arch into him. He had only gotten her halfway on the bed, so he knelt on the floor as she had, his tongue finding her clit, his hand hitching her thigh over his shoulder as his other hand held one side of her hips down. He'd been hard in her presence forever, and now he was going to enjoy it. Throb and volcanic simmer as her moans built and time dilated again in a godlike rush of one more thing to savor about her. The river of her voice turned to waterfalls and whirlpools as he held her hip down and her ankle dug into his back. She came in a glorious, clenching, arching rush. He watched her face for a few crucial seconds, her eyes clenched, tightly closed and her head back, a silver pool of hair that was always so sleek, now hand-combed and mussed just right. He stood, hauling her thighs up along his abdomen, a frenzy of heat and home, and his hands at her hips in the volcanic, driven slams, more sound from her in a wail, and he was gone, blinding, godlike, everything right because everything was her. He was dizzy, exhausted, exalted, and God needed a fucking nap, but he'd wake up. And he'd wake up next to her. And then he had everything he needed for the first time in a lifetime of chasing it. Her. Them. Moya went to go check on Garrus, who was sitting up in the mid-bay bed, looking like he wanted to murder anybody who wanted to keep him there. Moya smiled at him. Hey, you're alive. Good job there. Yeah, thanks for the rescue. Sorry about your face. Sorry about yours. Shut up, I'm gorgeous. So am I. Yeah, you are. So you haven't been looking at Karin like that, have you? What? No, I don't want to die. Yeah, I'd kill you. You? I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about her. Missed you. Of course you did. I'm gorgeous. And so is Karin. Finally managed to get her to take pity on you? Yes, and you helped. I was all grief-stricken. She fell for that? I fell for that. Glad I could help. Don't do it again. Get there sooner next time, Moya. We're gonna save the galaxy for Karin. Of course we are. We'll save Palaven, too. Yeah, well, Palaven's part of the galaxy. So everyone wins. Do Turians really prize scars for valor or something? Yeah. Humans don't? Pfft, I don't know. I'm too pretty. I don't worry about stuff like that. But I should know. Yeah, so Turians, Krogan, Asari, Drell, and humans are gonna find me impossible to resist. Can you take the Batarians and Vorchid too? I only need one human. You can have the rest. Hey, if we save the galaxy, can I name Palaven Garrus's place? Sure. Feeling better already. We've got a big gun. Yeah? That isn't a euphemism for anything, is it? What? No. If you were interested, you should have made a move. Nah. You don't have cool scars.